Good evening, friends of the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute. Can we just get one last round of applause for Solomon Matipa? Or I should rather say the Duke of Stellies, as that is how he's known, okay? The Duke of Stellies. It is always an emotional day for the colleagues of the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute when we host the annual Honorary Lecture, because our friends, our family, alumni scholars across the country are joining us in celebrating the life of the late Dr. Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert. I'm Heidi October. I am the Deputy Director at the Center for Student Life and Learning and also the head of the Institute. And on behalf of the Division, Student Affairs, and the Center for Student Life and Learning, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the 13th Annual Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Honorary Lecture. While our Rector and our Vice-Chancellor will ensure that we follow protocol this evening with the official welcome on behalf of Stellenbosch University, I do want to acknowledge that we have more than 400 alumni, student leaders from various institutions, members of the public, and the children of the late Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert, Tanya and Rico, joining us online tonight, together with our partners from various countries. A very warm welcome to all of you online. This lecture, supported financially by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, provides a platform for engaging conversations on current South African democracy, citizen, and governance matters. We honor the legacy of a great South African thought leader, the late Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert, who played a significant role in the democracy of our country. And today, 14 years later, can you believe it, since the launch of the Institute in 2011, through the collaborative work with our national and global partners, we are consistently expanding the leadership footprint globally with a range of leadership programs, cultivating thought leaders in our country and beyond. And on that note, I'm proud to hand over to the newest member of the team, our interim program manager, former Marty student leader and program director, Aluwani Ramarumo. Thank you.
Nimadekwana, Riperile, Molweni, and Goeienaand, everyone. Thank you, Heidi, for the introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here today. After many years of being on that side of the mic, it gives me a great pleasure to be on this side of the mic. This evening, I have the privilege and honor of inviting and welcoming our Rector and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Deresh Ramjiganath, who will provide us with the context of why we are here today, who will also do the official welcoming. And with that said, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and to all of our student leaders that are here this evening. It is my absolute privilege and honor to welcome you all to Stellenbosch University for this, the 13th Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Honorary Lecture. Now, this is, as Heidi has mentioned, it's a truly remarkable event that we've been having at this institution, and I've had the privilege in the past as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Learning and Teaching to play a role in previous events as well. And so it's a real highlight in the Stellenbosch University's calendar. So Heidi has already mentioned some of our guests, but let me do the protocol, as she put it, in terms of officially welcoming some of our guests that we have here this evening. So firstly, to our guest speaker, Ms. Bisisiwe Mavuso, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate that you've accepted the invitation to present the 13th Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Honorary Lecture. And we know all the fantastic work that you are doing at Business Leadership South Africa, and we really look forward to hearing from you this evening and sharing your thoughts and your insights. And I'll come a little later to what the theme for this year is, but I think, we look forward to those insights. To the Consul General of Germany, Ms. Tanja Wehert, very good to have you with us, and thank you very much for the support, the continued support that we have from the German Embassy and the Consulate in this regard. To Dr. Christoph Wiedenroth, the Deputy Resident Representative of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in South Africa, very nice to have you with us, and also for the continued support and relationship with regards to this particular lecture. To Uno Bashido, Nobby, Mabewa, the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Citizenship Engagement Coordinator, and she'll be facilitating the Q&A later this evening. To Prof. L.T. Links, our donor from the Ebb Bailey Trust, Dr. Leslie van Rooy, our Acting Senior Director for the Division for Student Affairs, to all of our alumni of Stellenbosch University, to all of our student leaders, and finally to our program directors who have been hard at work to put everything together. Dr. Heidi October, our Deputy Director for Leadership in the Center for Student Leadership and Life, and head of the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute, and Ms. Aluwani Ramarumo, the interim Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Program Manager, and who has also been a former student leader at Stellenbosch University. It's indeed a great honor for me to be here, and I'm sure it is for you as well, to be present this evening for us to remember Dr. Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert through this particular lecture. So this lecture series honors the remarkable legacy of Dr. Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert, a man whose life's work reflected courage, intellect, and an unwavering commitment to democracy. Since the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute was officially launched, as Heidi has said, in 2011, it has become a vital part of how Stellenbosch University contributes to our society by creating spaces where ideas meet action and where our young leaders develop their capacity to serve as engaged citizens. This year's theme is Everyday Citizen Leadership, 30 years and beyond. How do we practice our citizenship beyond elections? Now, many of the student leaders, you are going through that phase of student elections. Some of it has been concluded, some is still ongoing. It's not just about all the caucusing that you do and the lobbying, but it's about what you do thereafter, right? It's about how do you put all of those promises into action. Unfortunately, some of it very lacking in our country, a lot of promises that were made by leadership in the country that hasn't turned out into action, but I think the onus is on you to really ensure that. So this could not come at a more timely time in the institution, but also in our country. Elections are crucial moments where we exercise our democratic rights, but the real work of democracy happens in the days, the months, and the years in between. So it's not just about all the election campaigning and all the work that's done there. It's what happens thereafter in terms of ensuring that all of those great plans that have been put and showcased are put into action. Now, Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert understood this deeply. He practiced a kind of leadership that was not only about political office, but about shaping public thought, encouraging dialogue, and inspiring ordinary people to see themselves as agents of change. That is also why the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute exists, to prepare a new generation of leaders who understand that their agency extends far beyond a ballot paper and the ballot box. Our guest speaker tonight is no stranger to public leadership and also about holding leadership in general in our country accountable. Her own career stands as an example of this everyday leadership. In her role heading up Business Leadership South Africa, she has championed ethical governance, economic reform, and active citizen engagement in the corporate as well as in the public spheres. Her insights tonight will challenge us to think beyond our comfort zones, to reflect critically on our responsibilities as citizens, and to consider how leadership can and must be practiced in every sphere of life. And I've always said that we all have a role to play in contributing towards leadership, not just in our communities and in our institutions and in our country, through leadership roles that we hold, but also through non-positional leadership roles that we can fulfill. And I think it's critical in that regard to see that every one of us has a role to play in leadership in one way or another. So we look forward to your address this evening and to engage with you thereafter. I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and I invite you to engage deeply, to question openly, and to carry the conversation forward in all of your communities. The message that we are taking away today as part of, or this evening as part of the address, needs to be shared broadly in our communities, and I encourage you to do that. It is now my honor and my privilege to welcome Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso to deliver the 2025 Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Honorary Lecture. We really look forward to it.
Thank you, Prof. Deresh, for your ongoing support to our student leaders and for being an inspiring leader for our broader student community. Ladies and gentlemen, it's August. We are celebrating Women's Month. And what better segue to celebrate women in leadership by introducing our keynote speaker, Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. I want to highlight the following. When I give you a little snapshot of her bio, you probably would be sitting there and wondering, how on earth does she have time for a public lecture? I sent an email to her, and I went back to the team and I said, she said yes. And I was very surprised about the fact that there was an immediate yes to take time in her busy schedule to prepare an honorary lecture. Busisiwe Mavuso is a certified chartered accountant, accredited by the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants in the UK. She holds 2 master's degrees, a Master of Philosophy in Applied Business Leadership and Management from UCAM, also known as Universidad Católica San Antonio de Murcia in Spain, and a Master of Business Leadership from UNISA. In addition, she holds a postgraduate qualification in business management from Gibbs, Bachelor of Accounting from UNISA, and she is currently busy pursuing her PhD. Busi serves as a non-executive director at the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, Business Unity South Africa, Business Against Crime South Africa, Resultant Finance, a public investment corporation. And through her roles on the Human Resources Development Council and the Council of Social Justice Champions, she contributes to national development in various leadership capacities. She also finds time to be an associate for the Alan Gray Center at the University of Cape Town, member of the Institute of Directors in South Africa, and the Young Presidents Organization, also known as YPO. Busi has received several accolades and recognition in her leadership, for her leadership and her influence in South Africa. These include 2020 being the influencer of influencers mentioned from the Africa Brand Summit in 2021, the second runner-up for Business Person of the Year by the Daily Maverick in 2022, She also receives an acknowledgement from Women in Economic Development Leadership Forum, and most recently in 2024, the runner-up for Business Leader of the Year by the Future Leader Forum. It is my absolute pleasure this evening to present to you Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso, to deliver the 13th annual Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Honorary Lecture.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And thank you very much for the invitation. I don't know if I even need a mic. I'm normally told I've got a shop steward's voice, so I'm sure my voice can project to the end of the room. Dr. October, thank you very much for the invitation for me to come and share my insights and my thoughts and to give this annual lecture of the great Dr. Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert. The rector says he was a man of courage, a man of intellect, and had an unwavering commitment to democracy. And Rector, good evening. Thank you very much for those warm words of welcome. Consular General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Dr. Christoph of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, our student leaders, the management team, all protocols observed, and once again, it's absolutely an honor. Very, very important topic that has been chosen for us to address. You know, it's interesting because whenever we look at what has gone wrong or what is going wrong, we normally immediately go to the leadership, as we should, by the way, because you are called a leader for a reason. Someone once said that if the general is in the trenches, then the battle is lost. So leadership does play an important role. But I think there is a very important role and responsibility that we have as followers as well. So the topic that I've been asked to speak on is everyday citizen leadership, 30 years and beyond. How do we practice our citizenship beyond elections? And interestingly enough, when we just reflect on the work of Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert, and apologies, I forgot to accord my respect to the Van Zyl Slabbert family. Good evening, the family. I understand they're online. When you look at the work that Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert did, you find a man who unwaveringly stood for the truth, even if he was the only one standing for the truth and standing for that position. A man who chose the truth and forsaken popularity. A man who embodied the very essence of citizen leadership. So English is not my first language, it is my 11th language. So when I was given this topic, I actually had to look at my dictionary to say, what exactly does citizen leadership mean? What is the textbook definition of citizen leadership? This is the definition I found. It says, it refers to individuals taking initiative and responsibility to positively impact their community or society. It refers to individuals taking initiative and responsibility to positively impact their community or society. And again, reflecting back on Dr. Van Zyl Slabbert and what it stood for, you realize that citizen leadership is precisely what he demonstrated and what he did when he consciously decided to challenge the injustices of our country at that time. And his efforts, as we all know, culminated to the pivotal Dakar Conference in 1987, which marked a very significant turning point in this country and in our history, obviously representing the first steps towards dismantling apartheid. Citizen leadership refers to individuals taking initiative and responsibility to positively impact their community or society. Now, I really think that as citizens today, as South Africans today, as communities today, as societies today, we can do more. And I really think that we are on the right direction as a country, but we can do more. I think we're on the right direction because when we tackled the issue of our political leadership last year, when we went to the polls on the 29th of May 2024, that was an important marker of citizen leadership. You see, and this is why I get concerned when young people are indifferent towards politics, because politics matter. Politics equals economics, especially in South Africa, we are a political economy, which means our economic growth will always be constrained by the politics. If the politics fails, the country fails, and if the country fails, the economy fails. So you cannot therefore be indifferent in as far as politics are concerned. And you do not have the right to complain when you haven't taken your constitutional right to go and vote. If you are not going to vote, if you are not going to vote, you must just shut up and sit down. When it comes to issues that are not working in this country. You see, politics matter. We have a very recent example as a country called the State Capture Project. We are still trying to recover from it. Before the State Capture Project, the country was sitting at about 25% unemployment. Our growth levels were at 6-7%. Today, we are sitting at 43% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, where you have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape. It's a recipe for disaster. We are asking for trouble as a country to have so many people who are being put in this position. You know, I don't know how many of you remember the July Anarchy 2021. It lasted 4 days. From what we can quantify from an economics perspective, it cost this country 500 billion rands in damages. You look at it and you say, it was not necessarily a rule of law problem, it was a poverty explosion problem. That is what we have subjected our people to because we voted wrong as a country, because the political leadership failed. 43% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, 65% youth unemployment, 50% plus poverty levels, Gini coefficient of 0.67%. That is where most unequal society in the world. We have taken that title over from Brazil in 2019. That is where the country is sitting at the moment because we dared to put the wrong leadership in place. So you can look at leadership and say they are not doing what they are supposed to do. Who put them there? Because they don't put themselves there. So it says a lot about where we are as a people, as a country, to see nothing wrong by entrusting our 7 trillion rands economy to a person who has never even run a spaza shop. So one of my favorite thought leaders is Professor Patrice Lumumba. He's a very notable Kenyan Pan-Africanist, and is actually referred to as one of the greatest Pan-Africanists of our time. He's very passionate about this notion of African leaders devising African solutions. He says, leave the Americans to go to the moon, we need to find water as Africa, and we need to have energy security. So this thing is not a copy and paste, but he says, and I was listening to one of his clips where he was talking on the topic of the Africa, the rising continent. And in his address, he speaks about the importance of political leadership. He goes on to lambast the poor leadership in Africa, saying that Africa is what it is because our leaders are not what they ought to be. We are failing as a continent, and indeed we are failing as a country because our leaders are not what they ought to be. He says, when you elect a clown in the hopes that he's going to be a king, what he does is he converts the entire kingdom into a circus. He says that is part of the African problem. He says it all starts with political hygiene. He says most of Africa is suffering because we don't have democracies, we've got kakistocracies. A kakistocracy is a country that is governed by its least suitable. It's a country that is governed by its least competent. It is a country that is governed by its worst. He says that is what you have as Africa. You don't have democracies, you've got kakistocracies. And you look at it and you say, how did we end up in a place where we've got kakistocracy? At what point did we drop the bar so low as followers and as citizens? Is that citizen leadership? When you vote people whom you know very well don't even fit the definition of leadership. He says, who you elect, therefore, matters. He says, when you allow hyenas to take care of goats, why are you then surprised when the goats are eaten? Because it is in the nature of the hyena to eat goats. What did you think was going to happen? So when this person who has never even run a spaza shop starts to steal, what did you think was going to happen when you elected such a person into power? He says Africa will only realize her full potential when we allow our best men and women to lead us. He says it happened in Singapore when they elected Lee Kuan Yew. Why can't Africa do it? He says it happened in Malaysia when they elected Mahathir Mohamad. Why can't Africa do it? What is wrong with us as citizens to allow ourselves to ascend or to allow people to ascend to leadership who are not actually fit to be leaders? He says Singapore and Malaysia did it because there was a conscious decision by the followership to choose differently. So as a South African, I could not be more happier when the election outcomes of the 29th of May came out, or the election results of the 29th of May came out, because I look at it and I say, we addressed this political hygiene problem. It's still there, but I really think that it was a very important marker in terms of where the country is doing. That is why I'm saying I think we're on the right track, but we need to do more. What we are currently seeing at the back of those elections are very interesting and positive shake-ups in as far as some of these new ministers are concerned. We are seeing attention to governance and fiscal prudence returning. We are seeing major cleanup exercises of certain departments happening. We have allowed mediocrity to hijack merit for way too long as a country. We have allowed incompetence for way too long as a country. It is so inspiring in the many engagements that we have, and I have, from a BLSA perspective, when I engage with a whole lot of these new ministers. You know, it's like it's inspiring to just observe a fish swim. It's inspiring because this fish has been so useless for so long. So when it starts doing precisely what it was designed to do, it's just so inspiring. You look at it and say, wow, it swims. Of course it swims. That is why this thing was designed in the first place. It's very interesting when I listen to one of my favorite leaders in Africa, in South Africa, former President Thabo Mbeki. He says, in trying to drive the rebirth of his political party, he says, our glorious movement is now a criminal syndicate. He says, our movement has been overtaken by thieves. You know, it's interesting, I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine recently, and they were actually saying, it's amazing how leadership and governance seem like such over-exaggerated concepts until they are no longer there. It's amazing how leadership and governance seem like such over-exaggerated concepts until they are no longer there. Because while they are there, everything seems like it's on autopilot. Because stuff happens in the engine room. To the naked eye, you don't know what happens behind closed doors. You just walk into a room, you switch on your lights, and the lights come on. That is because we had leadership and governance in ESCOM. And the minute we took that away, it's amazing how quickly everything disintegrates. It's amazing how quickly everything comes crumbling down. So from where I sit, we needed to be here as a country. And I really think that there is an important demonstration of citizen leadership that we actually exercised as a country. You know, I think we must be the only country in the world, as South Africa, who doesn't know that politicians work for us. Instead, for some reason, we think we are their subjects. You see, it is a problem that we don't tell leaders the truth. Instead, we go into worship mode. Citizen leadership demands that we tell leaders the truth. We stand up for what is right, even if you are the only one standing for that position or standing on that position. We go into worship mode, and yet everything around us is crumbling and it's falling apart. If it's not electricity, it's water. If it's not water, it's decaying infrastructure. If it's not decaying infrastructure, it's a failing healthcare system. If it is not a failing healthcare system, it is this substandard basic education system. We are the only country in the continent that after achieving our liberation and after attaining democracy, we have seen our basic education system deteriorating. Only country in the continent. Zimbabwe, as dysfunctional as they are, their education system is not what our basic education system is as a country. And that's when you look at our income statement, education must be the fourth biggest line item in our income statement. You look at it and you're saying, how does the input not equal output? And why are we not raising those questions much more louder as a country? For me, when it comes to the education system, I think this one for me is a very sore point. It is a very sore point precisely because of our history as a country, where so many people were excluded, where so many people could change and lift and move from one social class to the other precisely because of education. Education has been a game changer for so many. It has been my game changer. So when we mess with that as a country, and the riots that you see have got absolutely nothing to do with this substandard basic education system. We go to the streets about everything else, but not about education. That for me is really concerning. You see, we've got a very huge responsibility and job as a country to ensure that we unlock our vast human capital potential. We need to find a way of transitioning our people from the dependence of government's helping hand and unlock their development potential. It can't be right, and I'm probably going to get these numbers wrong. It can't be right that you've got about 19 million people who are dependent on some form of social grants or the other, and only 5 million people who earn enough to pay as you earn. Those numbers, that scale doesn't balance. You can't have 5 million carrying 19 million. 43% of households in this country depend on some form of social grant. And we see nothing wrong with that as a country. And worse, we continue to give these kids this substandard basic education system. I got into corporate South Africa with matric because I couldn't go to university because of my financial constraints from back home. Matric. 50% was the pass rate in 1994 when I matriculated. We didn't have maths literacy. At what point did we deem it fit as a country to say you can pass? If you pass with 30%, you don't know 70% of the stuff. What? As a company, as a CEO, what am I supposed to do with you if you don't know 70% of the stuff? There is this annual test that we normally do, I've forgotten what the name is, assessment that we normally do as a country, where our grade 4 learners, yes, that, 80% of our grade 4 learners can't read for meaning. You know, South Africa is an open economy. If you are an open economy, it means you're not only competing with yourselves, you're competing with the rest of the world. So let's agree and let's accept that if the first 1,000 days of a child's life is the most important for building their foundation, our kids have lost the race before they've even begun running. They might just as well shut up and sit down, not even bother going to school anymore, because they've already lost this race. Because remember, grade 5 learners in Asia are being taught programming and coding. What fighting chance do our kids have if we continue to subject them to this substandard basic education system? We are condemning these kids to a life of RDP houses. We are condemning these kids to a life of social grants. We are perpetuating this vicious circle as a country. We are committing treason by not allowing these kids decent quality education. When we know that education is a serious game changer, as I actually said earlier on. I think it was our former president, Nelson Mandela, who said, it is only through education that a daughter of a peasant can become a doctor. It is only through education that the son of a man worker can become the head of a mine. And it is only through education that the son of farm workers can become the president of a great nation. Only through education. Now, citizen leadership, therefore, is under siege when you don't have a well-educated population, We will never win as a country if our people are not well educated, because otherwise you continue being held back and subjected to the lowest common denominator if you don't have a well-educated population. You continue to have these leaders who have never even seen a DOF school or don't even have matric, and yet they are running our 7 trillion rands economy. You will continue to suffer as a country, as an economy, and as a nation. Without a well-educated population, you don't benefit from critical thinking. You don't benefit from informed decision-making. You don't benefit from civic engagement. You don't benefit from personal growth. You don't benefit from economic growth. You don't benefit from social cohesion. You don't benefit from improved health and well-being. You don't benefit from having an informed electorate. So citizen leadership becomes compromised when you don't have a well-educated population. You see, when we educate our kids, we are training the next generation of leaders, the next generation of doctors, of nurses, of teachers, of law enforcement officers, who are going to care for us in our old age, and in whose hands we are going to entrust this economy. If we don't give them the right quality education, we are weakening our ability to survive the vicissitudes of life. If we don't give our kids good quality education, we are not benefiting from the next generation of thinkers. If you don't give them quality education, you put yourself in a difficult position as a country, because then in your most vulnerable stage, you are only going to be as strong as what you put in your kids. When you are vulnerable, not now, we don't see it now, but when we need it the most, we are only going to be as strong as an economy, as a society, as a country, as what we put in our kids. I think it is just so much easier to raise strong children than to try and repair broken men. It becomes difficult to try and catch it at the tail end. You know, if we are not careful as a country, we are inadvertently creating a crisis of dependency and a nation of beggars. A nation who has this entitlement mentality. We cannot be okay to have more than 50% of our people living in poverty. You cannot have citizen leadership when your people are not meeting their basic needs. You know, if you meet your basic needs, you are free to think about other things. It frees you to think about other things, because the weight of having to fight for your basic needs doesn't leave room for anything else. Because that is all you are thinking about. As I conclude, I had a very interesting conversation with Professor Thuli Madonsela, by the way, just shortly after our elections. And she said something very interesting about the MK party's electoral success, which came as a complete surprise to all of us. It shocked all of us. It caught everyone off guard. She said, we shouldn't be surprised about the extremism we are seeing from our people, because it is one of the ways in which desperation manifests itself. She says, people will follow anything that presents an opportunity to disrupt the status quo. She says, when the status quo isn't working for people, like it's not working for so many South African citizens at the moment, they try and find an environment of a reset, because they think that if there is a reset, then they will have an opportunity and they will have a chance. She says that is why people follow demagogues. That is why people follow political entrepreneurs. She said poverty and inequality does tend to push people to extremes. And when people are pushed to extremes, then citizen leadership goes out of the window. One of my favorite authors is Professor Wole Soyinka, a Nigerian author. He says, only in Africa will thieves be regrouping to loot again, and the youths whose futures will be stolen will be celebrating them. Only in Africa will thieves be regrouping to loot again, and the youths whose future will be stolen will be celebrating them. Citizen leadership and active citizenry goes out of the window when people are fighting to meet their basic needs. Not much else happens here upstairs when they are trying to meet their basic needs. We have to find a way of transitioning our people from the dependence of government's hand. It doesn't make sense. You see, we all get what we tolerate. In life, generally, we all get what we tolerate. And if the state capture project taught us anything at all, it is that the price of liberty is vigilance. So we need to be vigilant as a country, and we need to understand and appreciate that if it is to be, it is up to us. Because we are who we are waiting for, as June Jordan, American poet, says. We are who we are waiting for. No one is coming. Citizen leadership is precisely what we need to be doing and exercising on a daily basis. We are who we are waiting for. No one is coming. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I think I've gone over my 20 minutes.
It becomes very difficult to speak after that talk. But the keynote speech reminded me that 10 years ago this time, Open Stellenbosch was alive, Fees Must Fall was alive. We, the students of that time, were active citizens. We saw that education is expensive, so with the basic education being unaffordable, higher education is inaccessible. So South African students, the future of South Africa is actually in trouble holistically. But what we've learned today is that we need each other. But before that, I'd like to introduce Unopachida Mubaiwa, who will then be doing the Q&A. I'm certain that you'd like to hear more from our guest speaker, and so this is an opportunity for us to do that. Unopachida, the floor is yours.
Nkosiam. Yo! I don't even know where to start. But I want to firstly thank you so much for sharing your story, your observations of what's currently happening in our country. And I want to thank every single person who's taken the time to be here tonight because you understand the severity of what we're currently experiencing. So I had initially wrote down or sent through questions, but after your address, I realized that no, man, there's bigger things that we need to be talking about. So I want to start off, and how this is going to work is that I'm just going to ask one or two questions because I really want to give space for all of us here to get to share our voices, for all of us here to get to share our stories. And what I'm going to do is call a spade a spade. So when we look at, the individuals in this room, when we look at the student population that we have in this room, it's very important for us to understand that Stellenbosch is living in a bubble. Stellenbosch University is an island. And, when I was listening to you speak, and you said that citizenship is under siege, what is the role
that a university, I want to start there, what is the role that a university has to play when it comes to embodying citizen leadership? And then what is the role that a university has to play in then ensuring that all of the different stakeholders who fall within that university, within that society, also are held accountable to practicing citizen leadership? I'll start there.
Sure. Is this thing, okay. You know, whenever we have difficult conversations as a country, academia, the churches, I think those are the two big social partners and institutions that we actually tend to say, be the voice of reason. I think when you look back, and think about the conversations that we tried to have before our elections, where the other political parties were trying to form, I don't even remember the name that they called themselves, they called on Professor William Gumede, Vet School of Governance, to try and chair, advise, oversee their conversations. So I really think that institutions of higher education become important when we're trying to find logic, reason as a country. So I really don't think that our role only becomes the teaching, which is important. I think there has to be an appreciation that the ecosystem within which you operate, if that is not functioning, it also undermines what you're trying to do as an institution. So I honestly don't know from the daily engagements that a university would have to say, what does that look like, right? In terms of being actively involved, in trying to engage with issues that affect all of us. You are right. The universities, institutions of higher learning can't live in a bubble, because I guess you can't continue to be this. Stellenbosch is a very interesting case in point. You can't continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty, because I guess at some point that actually catches up with you. We will only win as a country when this prosperity is actually shared. So I really think that there is something to be said about the active involvement of universities in as far as those engagements and those interventions are concerned.
Thank you for that. And, that leads me then into my next question. And the first thing that comes to mind, and, since I was a child, I consistently heard it, which is, black child, you're on your own. And that's something that I've continuously thought about, navigating my own journey as a young black woman, trying to make a name for myself in a society and a system that has told me, that I'm not enough. And I want to speak about, leadership. And the first thing that I said that comes to mind is, we've been 10 years since fees must fall, since roads must fall, since Open Stellenbosch. Yet we still find students talking about the same issues, right? Fighting for the same issues. But we also have students who are fighting these issues and trying to be citizen leaders when they don't have access to food, when they don't have access to housing, when they're excluded from being able to receive that very same education that you're speaking about. So I'd like to hear from you when we're living in a society, where we need to be practicing citizen leadership. How does one do that when they don't even have access to the basic things that will enable them to be a citizen leader?
So the two big social partners in this country are obviously, and in many countries, by the way, if not all the countries, is government and business. And I really think that this notion of holding government and business accountable when it comes to these issues becomes very important. We are failing as a country We have these people, our young people suffer from these issues precisely because of political leadership failures. We have thieves masquerading as government ministers and government officials. We have normalized the thieving, the looting, the corruption that you have in this country. The political culture in this country is that being accused of crime is not embarrassing. You can be accused of crime and you can still be the president of this country. You can be accused of crime and you can still be a member of parliament. I worry about it because I look at it and I say, you know, a lot of people normally say I'm very hard on government, as I should be. Government in any country ought to be the adult in the room. The difference between good, prosperous states and bad, failing states is governments. Governments matter. You don't win as a country because of your geography. You don't win because of your ethnicity. You don't win because of strongman leadership. You don't win. You win because you've got a government that is functional. If government fails, the country and the economy fails. So there is something to be said about what is it that we're doing on a day-to-day basis to ensure that we hold government accountable. I was looking at a very interesting story. A lot of you would be aware of it. It's currently in the public domain, of this young girl, 32-year-old, IDT CEO, Tebogo Malaka, stole R1 billion, 32 years, stole R1 billion. She came into a system which said thieving and looting and corruption is normal. And I worry that in terms of where we find ourselves as a country, because this fish called South Africa is rotten from the head. We have normalized it so much such that a Tebogo is not the exception, she's the norm. It's normal in this country, you know, to actually continue with, she's not isolated, she's symptomatic. So there is something therefore to be said about how do we dial this thing back? At what point did we drop the bar so low? The moral degeneration that we are suffering as a country, at what point did we actually get here? From a business perspective, you continue, the very business that I represent, you continue to have a lot of companies who are not transformed. You see, I don't know what we think we mean when we talk about transformation. Transformation is, and this is someone, and I don't know whether the guy was from France or was from, when we're having this conversation, was trying to explain, you know, transformation, triple BE, employment, equity, and whatever. He was saying, oh, you're trying to normalize the society. Because that is what transformation seeks to do. You can't go to war with only 10% of your population. You see, the social structure in South Africa is a pyramid structure. 10% opulent, 20, 30% middle class, more than 50% of your citizens living in poverty. Nations that prosper, nations that win, have a diamond structure. 10% opulent, 10% poverty, and 80% middle class. Because it is the middle class that carries economies, not the rich. So what interventions, therefore, are we putting in place to ensure that we lift the bottom 50% to be in the middle class? Because that is how you win. When you think about transformation as business, you are investing in your future markets. Because people can't go into your businesses to buy your goods and your services if they don't have disposable income. They won't have disposable income if they are not working. If you transform and you are very intentional about whether, take the one notion of enterprise and supply development, supporting black businesses. You give a 5 million rands contract to a black business, they have no choice but to go and hire a pair of hands or two to be able to deliver on this contract. Because big businesses have reached their plateau in terms of creating jobs. You give them a 5 million rand contract, they can deliver on it with their current structure. So this notion of transformation, therefore, you put in people out, take them out of the unemployment queues, you're giving them employment. If they are earning salaries, they are no longer dependent on the state. It frees up the state to can do more. If they are earning salaries, they are contributing to taxes. If they are earning salaries, they've got disposable income. If you look at the GDP of the country, it's made up of investment spending, government spending, and consumer spending. Consumer spending is responsible for 60% of the GDP. If you have 43% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, consumer spending is severely compromised. That's why we continue to talk about the average consumer in this country being severely under pressure. So if you are not going to transform as business, you are therefore undermining and you are sabotaging your future markets, because you are going to shut your doors because people just don't have the disposable income to can actually go into your business to buy your goods and services. So I really think that there is a conversation to be had about business understanding. When we're saying transformation, what do we mean? And the simple definition for me, we are trying to normalize our society because ours is a very highly abnormal society.
Yo, Nkosi yam again. Thank you just for taking us through that. I mean, I have so many more questions, but I really want to open it up to the floor now because we want to hear from you, our guests. What is going through your mind? What are some thoughts that you have? So if you can just raise your hand and, please share your name with us. So we'll take about 2 questions first because I see 2 hands, and then we'll go from there.
Good evening. Thank you again for your lecture. It was a very, very powerful, I think, lecture for the audience tonight. My question sort of comes in 2 parts because I've been in a few conversations of this nature, and I would like to kind of go back to education for a second because I'm also a person who believes that education is a cornerstone for nation building, generally speaking. I would like to ask you kind of where would you suggest or start tackling that issue? And secondly, how would you convince the general populace or the average person that this is the way to approach it? Because if you were to say, okay, we're going to invest directly in education, the average person might respond by saying, but what utility am I going to receive out of that? Because your kind of value from investing in education might only realize 10, 15 years in the future when that student has eventually graduated and in the workforce. So, and I'm concerned about education in particular because we see now, we're living in a time where one of the largest democracies in the world is contemplating dismantling the Department of Education. So we I think, need to focus on this issue so that we don't fall into the same trap of anti-intellectualism and anti-institutionalism. So what's your thoughts on that would be my question.
Or do I answer that?
Whatever's going to work for you. So perhaps if you want to maybe answer, and then we'll go on to the next one.
So I think where we start with that is early childhood development. And I think when I say I'm encouraged about a whole lot of these new ministers who have actually come into office, this is precisely, what I'm referring to. The many conversations that I've had with Minister Siviwe Gwagube, she's very clear in as far as that is concerned. She's saying we have gotten the access to education right. Now we have to get the quality of education right. And she's the first one to lament the 30% pass rate. She's the first one to lament men's literacy. She's the first one to lament, this 80% of our grade 4 learners who actually can't read for meaning. So if we agree and we understand that the first 1,000 days of a child's life, that is where you build the foundation, it cannot be right that in the rural Eastern Cape, you've got kids who see the door of school and who touch a book for the first time when they go to grade 1 at age 7. In 4 years' time, you want to assess that kid for maths and English literacy. She's only been in the system for 4 years. That's why you're sitting with 80%, of our grade 4 learners who can't read for meaning. That is where you actually, and that is where it matters. So yes, it's going to take 12 years, as it should. I really think that we have gotten into this, and I think a whole lot of young people are very, they are guilty of this notion of instant gratification. That is utter nonsense. It doesn't exist. That is, there is virtue in having gone through the process. There is virtue in sequence. There is virtue in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so forth. You can't go to 1, to 5, to 7, it doesn't work. There is something you get along every step of the way that grows you and builds you as a person. things that you can't even get from a book. That is why you always have to start at the bottom and work your way up. It really doesn't make, so we really need to accept, and again, probably maybe this is the conversation, as I'm saying, that there is this moral degeneration, and I think a warped sense of our values as a nation. But when this fish called South Africa is rotten from the top, because you see, people don't do what you say, they do what you do. So you therefore model behavior, you don't talk behavior. So what we model, at the top is actually very problematic. So I don't know what a reset honestly look like, in terms of making our young people understand that going and coming up the ranks matters. This IDT girl has only been in the system for 6 years. How do you become a CEO of that multi-billion institution in 6 years? What have you learned in 6 years? So you actually look at it and you see that it is precisely because of the fragility of her foundation that she found herself in this situation. And the rookie mistakes that she has made along the way is precisely because she's wet behind the ears. So I really think that staying the course, has to be fashionable again. We have made a fundamental mistake, as a country to, tell these kids that this microwave popcorn culture doesn't work.
What I'm taking from that microwave popcorn culture is definitely speaking about the importance of unpacking the role that instant gratification also plays in the ability, for us as young people to perhaps still believe in the system, right? Or perhaps still believe that what we're doing is actually meaningful. And I attended a talk about 2 weeks ago where, someone asked the speaker and said, how is it that as young people we can continue to still feel inspired, to still have that motivation to want to make a difference whilst we're seeing that we're living in a circus, yet we're meant to be, building a kingdom. But we'll get back to that because I saw there was another hand over there. Please just state your name and then you can ask your question.
Good evening to Ms. Pusisiwe. Thank you for your speech. I think after that, I'm just very inspired to get out there and practice being a citizen. So my question, my name is Hakima, by the way. I'm a student leader at Stellenbosch University, and I'm also a Y20 South African delegate. So my question is also related to the G20. I'm not sure if you know about the G20 happening this year. And I think, of course, sorry, of course you know. But you spoke about the political economy, and I think the G20 is something where our country is, being hyped up about what's happening. But in reality, is it going to be fruitful? Because as a Y20 delegate, I'm bringing forth, I'm representing young voices. We are only 5 delegates from South Africa, and we have to represent so many young people's voices and opinions and perspectives. And you invest so much time into the policy recommendations that will be taken to G20, but a very small percentage of those policies actually gets implemented in the country. So is the G20 actually fruitful? Is it just for government and these people in high places to come together and say, yes, we've had a conversation? What are your thoughts on the G20?
So I'm hosting the B20. As Business Leadership South Africa, we are responsible for the B20, which is the business arm of the G20. So it's important conversations, but I think the mistake that we're making, and we probably maybe didn't give our people enough, context in terms of what this is not a South Africa event. It is a global event. So the G20 is an institution where the recommendations from Y20, from B20, from T20, from all of these 20s, they are put to the governments, because then that is what that is. Prime ministers, presidents, governments from all the 21 states that are actually member companies. So from a business perspective, for instance, we are looking at 6 themes: employment and education, energy transition, digital transformation, finance and infrastructure, ethics and corruption, industrial transformation. And in looking at these themes, we are not looking at these themes for South Africa. we're looking at these themes. In these task forces, you've got about 200 people, participants from all the different countries. And we look at trade and investment, for instance, and say, how is trade and investment going to be impacted in the global economy in the foreseeable future? What is it that we as business leaders are seeing as potential pitfalls or issues that we need to bring to the attention of governments for them to actually rule over or to discuss and to actually implement? One of the issues, for instance, is this issue of CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is the carbon tax that is going to be levied on the products that we export to the EU as countries all over the world. The EU is saying, if you're going to be importing products into my country, the carbon content by 2026 has to be less than, or has to have reduced by 60%. By 2028, it has to have reduced by 80%, and by 2030, 0% carbon content. Now, this becomes a problem because all of us, not just as South Africa, but as all these countries, are still dependent on electricity generated through coal. So reducing the carbon content therefore becomes a problem. So it therefore means that when you export, therefore as a South African company to the EU, your product is going to be met with this tax. It increases your cost of production. So we are appealing, therefore, to governments to say, can the EU not give us a reprieve? Can they shift the 2030 deadline because it's actually not good? So those are the type of issues. So from a South Africa perspective, when we started this, we said we want to use this platform as an opportunity to showcase South Africa as an investment destination, as an opportunity to showcase to the presidents of these 21 member states that South Africa is a jurisdiction that matters, that South Africa is a country that is on the mend, that South Africa still is the gateway to the African continent. We want to showcase the brilliant work that we have done and the progress that we have made so that we can be able to attract investment. So yes, from that perspective, it matters because you have had ministers, presidents that have actually come in and out of the country the entire year, and it's going to culminate in the G20 summit in November. So if we are successful in selling our story, look, we are already brilliantly positioned as Africa because we're the only continent that is growing at the pace that it is growing. So investors all over the world are going to be looking for markets. Africa is the market of the future. Our role as South Africa is to actually position ourselves to say, why should you enter the continent through South Africa? Why should you land here to be able to penetrate the Africa continent? And we do have a very strong business case. You know, we're the most resilient economy, we're the strongest economy, we're the most digitally and technologically advanced. You know, you get better integration into the world, you know, through the Africa. So there is a lot, we've got deep and liquid capital markets and so forth and so forth. So that is what the purpose of this is. So yes, if we actually sell the country right, it is going to match. My only disappointment is that we are choosing to take this thing to Nansrek. Nansrek is somewhere close to Soweto because the comrades want to eat. That's why they are using that. It doesn't make sense. You can't showcase the country. You showcase the country by showing them Stellenbosch and Cape Town, not Joburg. Joburg is failing. But anyway, that is a different conversation.
As a Joburg lover and someone from Joburg, I feel slightly offended, but it's fine. Yes, so we're just going to take, I see there's a lot of hands and I am cognizant of time, so we're just going to take about 3 more questions from the floor. So we have one question here, we have one question there, Aiden, and then we have one question there. I hope.
Okay, am I audible? Okay. So thank you so much for your brilliant talk and for specifically speaking to education. So education in this country, in the state that it's in, is by design. The apartheid regime was very intentional in how they lowered educational standards, specifically at a university like Fort Hare, but also for primary and secondary education. So what we're seeing now with the 80% of, I would say, predominantly black students not being able to read for understanding, that is by design. So what is the incentive for people whom this does not affect? For instance, for me, this affects me, right? Because it affects children who look like me. And I myself am a product of public schooling. And I got here through, I wasn't, what is this? You are not the rule, you're the exception. One of those kind of cases, which shouldn't even be a thing, right? So how do we incentivize the everyday person whose life doesn't revolve around having to worry about what to eat, when am I going to get a job again? Do I have a car? Can I go to Woolies and go get my groceries? Those are not the kind of things that they have to worry about, right? So how do we get, and I'm specifically speaking to this because in Stellenbosch, this is a very privileged town, and many of us get to come into privilege regardless of where we come from. So we need to be cognizant of that fact. So how do we get all of us in here to be interested in the things that are important for this country? So 10 years ago, I was on NSFAS, but as a student, I understood that it was important that other students who look like me don't have the ability to go to class. So when we protested, it wasn't because I didn't have funding. I had bursaries and I had funding, but I protested because I knew it was important. So how do we get the youth, and specifically young people, but also white people, to realize that this country is built not only on our blood, sweat, and tears, but on theirs as well, if they're willing to?
So, I'm going to repeat this again. When I matriculated I'm a Bantu education product. When I matriculated in 1994, 50% was about pass mark under the apartheid regime. Maths literacy was not a subject. Life orientation was not a subject. You had 3 streams: commerce, science, history, geography, and I guess that is the human sciences. And this black government has dropped the pass rate to 30%. You still don't know 67% of the staff if you pass at 33.3%. You have a child passing matric with English, Afrikaans, Zulu, maths, literacy, LO, and geography. How do you even allow that combination of subjects? As a commerce student, my stream was business economics, maths, and accounting. There wasn't anything else. I couldn't go and take geography. No, that is the stream. There was thought in terms of what you are studying and what you are being channeled to. So when you allow this black government, when this black government allows a child to take these subjects and then get A's in matric, at what point, how long is enough? Is 30 years not enough to could have, who are we waiting for to give us the go-ahead to change things and do things differently? You see, government has got a very powerful instrument that is not available to any other social partner, which is policy. It is through policy that you actually change the direction of the country. You implement policies to move the country in a particular direction. So there is something to be said about personal agency and the stories that we tell ourselves. It cannot be right that Tebogo Malaka steals 836 million at 32 and we say apartheid. At some point, we're really going to have to call each other out and say, this cannot be right. Where is apartheid in this entire thing? So I think the thing that I agree with you on is probably maybe policies. To say, if you're sitting in this wide privilege, and maybe let me say business, let me leave Stellenbosch as a town. So what is it then that you force business to do? We implemented triple PE, employment equity, and whatever the case is. If business is not getting transformation right, where is monitoring and evaluation? Because in that legislation, there is a clause which says if you are not going to be conforming from a transformation perspective, you are going to be penalized. Show me a single company that has been penalized in 30 years. Not even one. So whose fault then is it Is it still really fair, and does it still make sense to blame apartheid?
I just want to say, ma'am, because we are at the birthplace of apartheid and where it was architecturally and conceptually theorized, specifically in the Volkerkunde and the anthropology department, not too far from here, I think we can never leave the apartheid conversation when it comes to this particular university. Regardless of, I understand your point that we can't blame everything on apartheid, but I think it should never leave the conversation because this is where it was born.
It shouldn't leave the conversation, but similarly, let's ask the question of what is government doing? What are they doing to change? Who are they waiting for? Who needs to give them permission to change? I'm the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. If things don't go right in that company, I'm not waiting for no white person to tell me what to do. I change. That is leadership. It's about decisiveness. And if you're going to be making the wrong decisions that pull your people back, I really think that it is a cop-out when it comes to some of the things, not to everyone. When it comes to some of the things, it is seriously a cop-out for us to continue to blame apartheid. It really cannot be right.
We're on the same page. I think that's time.
Awesome. So, yeah, let's clap. I am cognizant that I did say that 2 more people could ask questions. Is that okay? So we have Aiden over there, and then we have a hand over there.
No, it's Liam here.
Okay, but there was a hand over there.
No, he was first.
So Aiden can go.
Hello. Okay.
He was first because he was sitting behind me, so I saw him first.
Okay. So it's that.
All right, Aiden, off you go.
Which one's going?
Aiden, you can go, bro.
Aiden.
Good evening, Mrs. Basiswa. Thank you for your speech. Just to take it back to citizen leadership, what's your opinion in ethical leadership, and especially ethical leadership amongst the youth, and how can we avoid unethical leadership amongst, like, in an institution like higher education? If my question is clear enough. Thank you.
And maybe let's take the next question, and then you can answer both. Liam?
Professor, thank you so much for the lecture. I've often been told that accountants don't have a personality, but thank you for proving that accountants can bring life to the party. I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask, so we know that the states failed, that's settled, that's common cause, and we know that business then has to step in to get some economic growth. But then we often have cases, gentrification cases, and especially recently the Commando judgment from the Constitutional Court, where you see business stepping in, but what that does is that reshifts the economy, and then you have almost reverse apartheid. So do you think that business understands their social responsibility in your experience? And do you think that the way that South Africa's economy is structured lends itself to a society where we have business stepping in, realizing their social responsibility, realizing that they have a part to play in advancing the Bill of Rights, et cetera, I'd love your input on that. Thank you.
Awesome.
So there is a lot of businesses who are actually doing a lot of work when it comes to social responsibility, but I absolutely agree with you, not enough. We do it as a tick box exercise. So I think business still remain one of the biggest culprits. This notion of equality and equity still hasn't dawned for business. But you see, when you are used to privilege for so long, equality seems like oppression. You know, when you have to all of a sudden be on the same level with anyone else, you feel as if you are it's uncomfortable. But that is why then, who's the adult in the room to drag business kicking and screaming to do the right thing? And I think that is where, for me, when you look at a system, when you look at the ecosystem within which we operate, there are assigned responsibility for all of us as players in the system. And I think that is where then the role of policy and monitoring and evaluation then comes in, you know, to say to what extent do we ensure that everyone is like this thing that is being done by the unions. They just are militant, they create rubbish and no one calls them to order. You know, and I think, so that shows that there is something in the ecosystem that is actually not going right. So I really think that business is doing a lot, but not nearly enough. If you continue to have gender pay gaps, if you continue to have, you don't have equal pay for work of equal value, you know, it really becomes a problem. And if you continue to have, in a country where 56% of the population are women, but you actually walk into boardrooms, you know, when it's still very much a male-dominated space. You know, if you continue to have corporate South Africa looking like the outpost of Europe when 90% of the population is black. It cannot be right. There is something we're not doing right as business, and we can actually do more. How do we avoid unethical leadership? You know, leave unethical or ethical. Leadership is about 3 things and 3 things only. It is about courage, it is about decisiveness, and it is about ethics. So when you say ethical leadership, it is tautologous. You are being repetitive. Inherent in leadership is ethics. So how you avoid unethical leadership? Don't steal. You can't, and be honest. You can't be a leader if you are not honest. Honesty and leadership, it is inherent, it is, you're right? It is ethical leadership. Honestly, you need people who need to do right by this. The best definition of ethical leadership or ethics that I've had is that ethics is what you do when no one is watching. Just do right, even if no one is watching and no one can actually see you.
Well, we have run out of time, but Busisiwe, I want to thank you just for everything you've shared. And what really comes to mind, as you said, and that was going to be my final question, which is, what is the type of leadership that South Africa needs? What is the type of leadership that all of us in this room should be exuding? And that is courage, that is decisiveness, and that is ethics. So everyone, let's turn it into a kingdom and stop turning it into circuses, all right? Thank you so, so much for everything.
Thank you very much. Before you leave, sure, there's so many things going through my head right now. I just want to say that part of leadership is also to be cognizant of followership, and that we all collectively have some investment in the social construction of leadership. And that's exactly what tonight's conversation really emphasized for me. Thank you very much for thought-provoking arguments tonight. And it's now official that I declare you our newest honorary member of the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the key components of Stellenbosch University's Vision 2040, apart from a transformative student experience, is purposeful partnerships. And so I mentioned earlier that next year we will be celebrating our 15th year since the inauguration of the Institute in 2011. And throughout the years, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung has been a long-standing partner. And that really says a lot in terms of the trust that they have in the Institute as a collaborative partner to really deliver on the work and the legacy of the late Dr. Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert. So it gives me great pleasure tonight to welcome Dr. Christoph Wiedenroth, who is the representative for CAS in South Africa. Very warm welcome to you to deliver a short message on behalf of the foundation.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. Good evening, first of all. Sorry. So all protocols observed, as you say, in South Africa. And first and foremost, I would like to thank all of you for being here tonight and for joining this conversation. You kindly introduced me already. I'm Christoph Wienroth. I'm the Deputy Resident Representative of CAS here in South Africa. Our resident representative, Gregor Jecke, is unfortunately not available tonight, but he sends his regards, and I'm sure that he's watching right now. So tonight, we gather in the spirit of a man whose life work was to connect principle with action and politics with the people it serves. We come together not only to honor one of South Africa's great thinkers and leaders, but also to celebrate the spirit of engaged citizenship that he so powerfully embodied. Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert is someone who stood for something that is easy to say, but very difficult to live by. He showed us that democracy is not a spectator sport. It is something we practice together every single day, and not only in moments of crisis or at the ballot box. He showed us that leadership is not only defined by holding office, but by taking responsibility. And taking such responsibility can take place virtually everywhere, whether it's being in your community with local challenges or all the way up to the national parliament. So given this importance, I would like to return the favor and thank you once more for organizing this annual lecture and for keeping it alive over so many years. Yet, this annual lecture here today is more. It serves as a room for discussion and important conversations at a time where exactly these spaces are shrinking at a rapid pace across the world. At CAS, we believe deeply in the importance of having conversations, as the one here tonight, to nurture an active civil society. We as CAS implement this approach in over 100 countries around the world and use it as a tool to promote value-based civil societies, multi-party democracies, good governance, human rights, and the rule of law. And while we're politically close to the German Christian Democratic Union, the party of Chancellor Friedrich Merz currently, our commitment is universal: to foster healthy, functioning democracies with active civil societies as their beating heart. Now, if we turn to the task ahead that civil society faces today, I can't help but notice a few things that I've observed since I've arrived in South Africa last year. First of all, South Africans have welcomed me very warmly, so thank you very much for that. But I also must say that I've met a lot of people that care deeply about the path that their society takes, and people with simply brilliant ideas on how to overcome current challenges. So there's definitely no shortage of that. But honestly speaking, I've also seen the silos, the parallel narratives that sometimes seem to not speak of the same country at all. And I believe that today's challenge as civil society is to overcome exactly these differences, to engage one another and to find common grounds in apparently different standpoints. So as we listen to tonight's lecture, I hope we see it not only as opportunity to reflect, which is important, but also as call to action. Let us take the insights we've gained here tonight as tools to practice citizenship daily, to lead in ways big or small, and to remember that each one of us carries a responsibility for the future of our democratic societies. In the end, this is something Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert has taught us. He taught us as individuals who are willing to go that extra mile, who are willing to persist on matters that are important, not just to them, but to society at large, can really make the difference that is needed sometimes to create change. And with that in mind, I would like to say thank you once more for the conversation tonight. I hope you have a fruitful afternoon, and thank you very much. There are a lot of things.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Cass for your support of the Frederik Van Zyl Slabbert Institute over the years. You've made it possible for us to create a space where we engage citizen leadership, a space that not only brings in students, but the greater community as well. So we thank you for that, where we also get reminded by speakers like Mrs. Busisiwe to say that as South Africans, we need to do more. It is now my honor to invite Dr. Leslie Van Roy to give us a word of thanks. An interesting side note is that he is the predecessor for Dr. Heidi. He was in that role previously. And as the saying goes, home is where the heart is. And that's why he's here today.
Thank you very much. It does feel like a bit of a family gathering, Heidi. Some familiar faces, individuals that I know was here when we launched the Institute now almost 15 years ago. And in that sense, the lecture remains most probably the heartbeat of what is possible and what we would like to see through the work of the Institute. And I must really thank Heidi for making sure that that is strengthened and that it continues. My role is to say thank you this evening. It is an evening that is not possible and cannot be possible without the help and support of individuals. And Professor Ramjugunath, I'll start with you. Thank you very much for making this possible in more than one way, as DVC, as you indicated, but now also as Vice-Chancellor. Then I want to skip a bit and come to Unopachido Mubaiwa. Now, your legacy, of course, in the halls of the Van Zyl Slabbert Institute precedes your appointment, and I thought you did excellently this evening. So thank you very, very much for that. Then to Christoph Wiedenroth, when we launched the Institute, on that very same evening, Christina Teichmann came up to us and said, Konrad Adenauer would want to be involved in the Van Zyl Slabbert Institute, and Heidi, the right next day, we solidified that this lecture must be part of that agenda, and now almost 15 years later, it is still the case. So we really, really must say thank you to you. And then Solomon Matipa is still here, I hope. I see that you're the Duke of Stellis now. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, many titles, you were brilliant. Thank you very much for the energy. You're now, I think, a familiar face in a lot of our functions and engagements. I'm very happy about that. Thank you very much. And then to our speaker, Busisiwe Mavuso, this is an interesting lecture. It brings together voices from all over South Africa and further, that each one tangles into the story of Van Zyl Slabbert and tangles into the fabric of South Africa. I cannot think of anyone better to do it this evening, and you did it excellently. Thank you very much for that. And then I really want to say thank you to the two Slabberts online. Tanya and I had a bit of a WhatsApp conversation earlier, so I know you're online, Tanya, I think from Hermanus. Rico, I think, is online, Heidi. I cannot imagine and think of anything more daunting than to allow others to think and hold and foster the legacy of your father. So we really must say thank you to Tanya, Rico, and the broader family for the fact that something of Van Zyl Slabbert's story can remain alive and that you entrust that story to us. Ours is a role of making sure that that lives on, and that lives on in many, many ways. That will hopefully have made him proud and hopefully will make the family proud. Thank you very much for everyone who attended. There are partners from other institutions, a number of our senior colleagues, including some of our deans, members of the rectorate, a number of students who partook in some of the courses and are still formidable in force and in activism and in full leadership on campus, and I see some who will stand in the SRC elections as well. So thank you very much for being here. I wish you a wonderful, wonderful evening. And is it my role to invite everyone out, Heidi, or will you come to say that? Thank you very much. I wish you a wonderful evening. Bye, Duncan.
it's that time. But before we go, or before I let everyone out, this is a call to all the students. Do not be indifferent to politics. Go vote, go call your friends to go vote for the SRC elections and any other elections that are happening on campus. Otherwise, you are here for nothing, because we were taught that you must go and vote. And also, to have further discussions similar to what we had today, I invite you to our masterclass series, Pan-African Leadership, which is happening on Thursday. I ask you kindly to scan the QR code and go to the masterclass. You are also able to go online. So for those online, please also scan and attend online. You'd like to further?
Masterclasses, you get academic transcript recognition if you submit a post-masterclass activity. What we'll be discussing this week are African intellectual and cultural histories. That is the preservation, reconfiguration of how people we might have deemed to have been liberal thinkers at a certain time. How can we review and view their work at this particular moment? So that's what we'll be discussing.
All right. Thank you so much for the clarity. And I forgot to say something earlier. Everyone looks incredibly well. You look stunning. And with that being said, I'd like to invite everyone for the food, for the reception. Please feel free to engage with each other and continue having this important conversation. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.